All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our November Science Speaker Series at the Murray Mitchell Association. I'm Janelle Gurley, the Director of Science and Programs here at Murray Mitchell, and it is my esteemed pleasure to welcome both Dr. Jackie Milingo this evening, our Astronomy Director at the Murray Mitchell Association, as well as Darren Humphreys, Founder and CEO of Travel Sommelier. And this evening, they will have a joint or share a joint presentation with us on total solar eclipses of 2026 and 2027, some curated trips inspired by science and wonder with Travel Sommelier and the Murray Mitchell Association. So join me this evening, everyone, on your end, just to welcome us all. And I will just give a short overview of the presentation as well as our presenters. So this evening, Darren will share how Travel Sommelier is designing seamless, one-of-a-kind eclipse travel experiences crafted with precision, passion, and purpose. These itineraries include a week-long journey in northern Spain in 2026, featuring Barcelona's culinary delights and Menorca's wellness offerings, as well as a trip along Egypt's Nile in 2027, exploring ancient temples and the storied landscapes of one of the world's most historic civilizations. The MMA will collaborate on these exclusive trips by providing professional astronomers to enhance the experience and offer expert insights on the celestial events, giving participants an insider's view of these extraordinary astronomical phenomena. This presentation offers a unique opportunity for travelers, astronomy enthusiasts, and anyone who's curious about the intersections of culture, history, and the cosmos to learn about once-in-a-lifetime adventures to witness these extraordinary solar eclipses. Join me again in welcoming both Jackie and Darren this evening. Welcome, guys. Thank you for presenting.
Thanks, Janelle. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So, welcome to everyone this evening. Great warm welcome, Janelle, I must say. As many of you know, and I can't see everyone on the screen at the moment, but we have dipped our toes in the water already, Travel Sommelier and the Murray Mitchell Association, with two short duration domestic experiences and trips as we kick off our partnership for luxury, experiential, nature and science-based travel domestically and globally. And it's heartwarming. It's been a great success. I've loved things like birding in Central Park to get an idea of what we can bring from a nature and education perspective, and then a hands-on experience in Nantucket for a scalloping weekend. And this has been the bedrock from which we're going to launch a more international footing. And front and center are two trips, 2026 and 2027. And 2026 and 2027 are both for the same reasons, solar eclipses. Distinct and different. And we have the privilege of having Jackie here, who's going to outline the science behind them. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the logistics and the fun part of what we're doing when we're not boring down a telescope or bearing down a telescope, should I say. So what is going to set these trips apart is, as I've just alluded to, Jackie, we're going to have something that I don't think any other trip that I've come across is going to have, and that is the services of a world-renowned astronomer on board with us, particularly when it comes to the Egyptian version of this trip in 2027, as you can see from the imagery bottom right here. But coming back to the cadence, 2026, there is a solar eclipse in August, and the path of totality runs through northern Spain. It's a short eclipse, less than 2 minutes. In 2027, there is a solar eclipse that runs through central Egypt, and as luck would have it, it's exactly pretty much over one of the most historic sites in the world, one of the most ancient sites in the world, the Temple of Luxor and the Nile River course to the south of it. And that path of totality is 6+ minutes. So this is what we would call the big boy as far as solar eclipses go. And it's a trip that I think anybody who has an interest in this kind of genre of trip, I say it's like Nike. Just do it. It's that kind of a trip. So those are the two trips. If we advance the slide here, we can talk a little bit through Spain. So Spain, we have certainly one proposed itinerary for a mainland viewing of the eclipse. And what we have done is we have looked at combining the very best of northern Spain over a roughly 9-night, 10-day period. And at almost the very center of that duration, we're going to view the eclipse. And we've comprised the trip of three components. Bilbao, which is a rapidly gentrified northern port city in the Basque region of Spain, right on the Bay of Biscay, which got put on the map for Frank Gehry's Guggenheim. And then after that, we head south to La Rioja, to the heart of Spain's most famed wine region. And that actually is where the path of totality will reside. And that's where we're going to view the sub 2 minute eclipse. And the component in Bilbao is about culture. It's about introduction to all things Basque country, to a very independent-minded, very thoughtful, very unusual area of Spain in the northwest. La Rioja, outside of the eclipse component, is going to be an enjoyment of all things wine and culinary from a Spain perspective. And then finally, as you can see, the centermost little bubble up the top, we're going to end that trip off in San Sebastian. And San Sebastian, the beauty of it is it is a rugged, absolutely gorgeous coastline that runs east-west along the northern reaches of Spain. And you have the ability not only to consume some of the finest culinary in all of Europe, but at the same time, you can explore the coastline, explore a beautiful Belle Epoque city, and get up into French Basque country for a half-day excursion if you wish. So a very balanced trip. And I think the beauty of these trips is not only, as I mentioned, that we will have the science, which Jackie will elaborate on in a couple of minutes behind it, but we're going to bring a lot of fun and frivolity and balance from not only in education, but a physical outdoors, a cultural, a socio-political, and historical perspective. So that's the Spanish trip. If you just go back a slide quickly, Jackie, there's just one thing I did want to mention before we move on from that. There was mention made at one juncture of a backup trip. So should the mainland trip sell out, there is the possibility, becoming more remote as time goes on, I must say, as we lose the availability to secure things here closer to the time. But there is a possibility that we might be able to do a second trip, which would comprise of Barcelona and Menorca. So there's two tabs on the right there. We can elaborate on those as if and when, but for the moment, we should stick to our discussion around the mainland. So yeah, we can talk about the next slide quickly. So this really brings to life the itinerary that I gave an outline of. This is a little bit more granularity. As I mentioned, 3 nights, 3 nights, 3 nights, Bilbao, La Rioja, and on to San Sebastian. And we talk through each of the hotels and accommodations that we've chosen. Just a little word about that, so you get a sense of how Travel Sommelier thinks and how we're going to dovetail with Mariah Mitchell. Hotels and accommodations and lodgings that deeply deliver a sense of place is what we covet. And all of the accommodations here, as you'll see from the imagery upcoming, speak very much to that. So let's pop on to the next slide, Jackie. And I would make mention that, as with everything that we do, this is in industry parlance, soup to nuts trip. In other words, point to point. From the moment you land at the airport until the moment you are returned, you're enveloped. There's a tremendous amount of oversight. We have an overarching guide. We have specialist guides. We have Jackie along with us. So there's a lot of oversight when you're on the respective trips. And I've detailed some of the experiences and some of the day tours just to lay out a little bit more broadly what we're going to be doing in each of the destinations. And you see some of the highlights that I already mentioned here, like the Guggenheim, visits to the beachside and regal city of Santander, etc. So we'll advance on to the next slide, and more than happy to answer questions, obviously, about these details later on. What I would also say is that we can make this available to you, not only the itineraries themselves, but this presentation. And then, as I mentioned, onto La Rioja. And for anybody who is a lover of wine, I mean, it's arguably the most well-known wine region in the country and crafts beautiful wines against a stunning backdrop of nature. And I think one of the beauties of this wine region is the culinary stands up to the wines, the scenery stands up to the wines, and there's a tremendous juxtaposition, something that I love about wine regions. Easily navigable, and the reason I say juxtaposition is you've got this medieval architecture, as you can see from this old church slash cathedral over here, juxtaposed against some very modern architecture. Frank Gehry has designed a very unusual titanium roofed hotel here, etc., etc. So great wine region and area to be based in, and this is where we will see the eclipse. So onward to the next one, Jackie, and this showcases the last stanza, San Sebastian. You know, globally, there are a handful of cities that accrue Michelin stars. This is a city that is right up there with Paris, Tokyo, Rome, London, New York. Unbelievable concentration of some of the finest restaurants in the world. And as I mentioned, the ability to explore the Basque countryside, a Bella Park city that is absolutely gorgeous to walk around, and then very easy to do what I call the twofer, jump across the border into France and have two countries for the price of one. So that fleshes out the trip. And if you advance quickly, Jackie, you'll see a little imagery. That's the Guggenheim in Bilbao that I mentioned. More of the countryside in and around Rioja to give you a sense. And that medieval sort of architecture as well in and around the wine region. And then yep, a little bit more about expansive cellars that we'll be visiting. And this is San Sebastian. It is one of Europe's great walking cities. And as you can see, there are two bays here. Top right of your screen is the second bay, and there are two headlands, which are great hiking, day hikes. You feel as though you're in a very different part of Europe and the country. So if we just advance, we'll have a quick look at properties. If you recall earlier on, I said deliver a sense of place. You'll be staying, whether it's Bilbao here or the next slide we get to now, Rioja, or the slide after this, Maria Cristina, which is a beautiful Grand Dome hotel in San Sebastian. Each of them, you can be nowhere else but in these cities. So that really is a wrap on Spain. I do want to point out before we advance to the next slide after this one, Spain, we have been talking about this for a little while. As time advances, it is becoming increasingly difficult to affect this based on demand that we're seeing. So please note that if Spain does come into sharp focus after this presentation, it's something we will need to action very, very quickly to avoid disappointment. We are, 6-7 months out from finalizing, from departing on this trip. So arrangements need to be finalized. And then if you advance here, Jackie, we can talk a little bit about Egypt. This is our baby. This is something we are immeasurably excited about. I just returned from Egypt, and I have the privilege of traveling all over the world, frequently, deeply, and I come back impacted. Egypt's a known quantity, yet it still finds a way to deliver you this majesty of experience that is difficult to convey until you've been there. You cannot be an armchair traveler when it comes to Egypt. You have to advance to being in the country. And when you're there, the beauty of it is you can actually touch, like literally touch 3 to 4 to 5 millennia of history. I'll give you sort of a quick aside. Our Egyptologist took us to a dig, almost like an Indiana Jones, the set of an Indiana Jones movie, behind the Valley of the Kings. These things are still happening in living Technicolor. And he didn't put a piece of pottery in my hands. He said, reach down and pick it up next to a hole a tunnel they were pulling things out of. And it was the pottery, he said, was next to his digger that had excavated that morning. I was likely the second person that had touched it in 3,000 plus years. I mean, that's a freak of ancient experience right there and then. So, Egypt fills me with wonderment. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to showcase as much as possible of this remarkable country from Cairo all the way down to Aswan along the Nile River course, and be at the very epicenter of the Nile, just south of Luxor, when this eclipse will happen. I think it's on August the 12th, is it? Jackie will come to it in a second, but in any event, it's a 6+ minute solar eclipse. And it is, as I said earlier on, it's the big boy. We're not going to see this for, I'm open to correction, but a quarter of a millennia, 250 years, it's not happened. So I think a lot of people are likely familiar with the Nile River course and the geography of Egypt for that matter. But down south, where that first bubble is the famed Aswan Dam, where they dammed the Nile. And the Nile flows from there all the way in a northerly direction and empties into the Mediterranean at the port city of Alexandria, with Cairo en route. And we start actually in the north and we head south. So in the north, we will be based pretty much with a direct view of the Great Sphinx and the pyramids. And then we'll work our way south, flying actually to Luxor, experience and enjoy the Valley of the Kings, and then embark on a voyage which will take us down to Aswan before this trip comes to its zenith. And well, actually zenith is likely the eclipse, and then we head back from Aswan to Cairo, and everybody heads home. Now, the point I would make here before we advance to the next slide is it is very difficult to underscore what kind of demand there is globally for this eclipse. And thanks to some very proactive management by Mariah Mitchell as a foundation, we've been able to secure an excellent vessel. It is ours. Nobody else on it but our group. And I think that is going to create a dynamic around a kinship that will be on that vessel, motivated by a love of astronomy, motivated by a deep desire to understand exactly the nature and the science around this. It'll be very much education based. And this is where Jackie's really going to come into her own. In the lead into this, we're going to have the benefit of all of her knowledge. We're going to have the telescope on board. We're going to be able to observe this firsthand. And then afterwards, any developments, any thoughts, any machinations, these will all come out. And I think that it's invaluable. I can't underscore how important that is. So let's move on to the next slide here and talk a little bit through the itinerary. Again, this is a slightly longer itinerary. This comprises of 10 nights as opposed to 9. And as I mentioned, we'll be in Cairo to begin with. It's important also to note here that in addition to Jackie, we have our Egyptologist who's going to be guiding us through components of Cairo that you wouldn't normally see. Absolutely, we're going to see the highlights, the new Egypt Museum, the new exhibits, temporary, permanent at the time. But more to the point, it's going to be very education based. It's going to be very well thought out, and it's going to be proprietarily built around us. So 4 nights to experience Cairo, orientate to the country, acclimate as well, which is important. And there's a thing I should mention here. Inescapable. It's hot. One thing to know when you are in Egypt in August, it's one of the hottest months of the year, just as it is here in the Northeast. So just be prepared for that. Air conditioning throughout, air conditioning on the vessel, the ability to take a dip in the Nile whenever you choose, but make no mistake, it's going to be a warm time of year. So after those 4 nights in Cairo, we fly south and we embark on our cruise. We'll come to imagery of the vessel in a little while. It is a diabea, which is a traditional boat that plied the waters as a merchant vessel up and down the Nile, north and south, for eons. And they've been lovingly restored. And they're under sail for the most part. This one is a combination. It's under sail, but it also has engine power. So fear not if we don't get any wind, no one's paddling. It's all good. And we have that sole use for a 5-day period. And we're going to exit Luxor. We're going to see Edfu, etc., all of the major temple sites along the way. And we have a very, what we believe, private and well thought out site from which to view the solar eclipse. And then we end in Aswan. And this is actually a real treat. It's kind of the cherry on the top of the end of the trip. You will see Abu Simbel, which is, to my mind, one of the most iconic temples in all of Egypt. And it's a great way to end. And then, boom, up to Cairo, and we're gone. So if we advance a little bit here, Jackie, we can take a look at some of the imagery, which obviously showcases Cairo to begin with. It's a city that's obviously is based on the Nile, but incredibly energetic. And once again, the mysticism that surrounds not only the structures that are currently the big focal points, like the pyramids and the Sphinx, etc., but also where all of this antiquity is kept in various museums. So we'll move on to continuing a little bit through to Cairo. Yep. So a little bit more imagery, a little bit more of a description. One thing that's interesting about the city is, and I see here we've showcased the Islamic Quarter. It's a city where, of course, you automatically think of Egypt as a Muslim country, which it is. But the way in which Jewish quarters are alongside Islamic quarters or alongside Christian quarters is it's quite redeeming, and it's an interesting walk through history to see a lot of that living technicolor in Cairo. So there's many different dimensions to it, and if we advance here, next up, Jackie, we'll look a little bit at further south. Obviously, the Valley of the Kings is an absolute rite of passage as we start off. The scale, for those of you who have not been to the Valley of the Kings, is something that you don't have any frame of reference about until as and when you see it up front. It's quite remarkable. And then, as I mentioned here, we'll head further south to Edfu, and we advance to the next slide. You can get a little sense of imagery along the watercourse. These are the temple sites, the most major ones we'll stop at. We'll do day trips and see. And yeah, people often ask, how are you keeping cool? You're keeping cool by dipping in the Nile. So, we have sailing days where we'll find little private beaches, set up picnics, have a swim, cool off. It's all about balance. And then Jackie will guide us through the solar eclipse on the 2nd, sorry, not the 12th, the 2nd. And then if you advance, Jackie, we end up at Abu Simbel. So Cairo here, moving onwards from this one. Markets, I think this is an important component. Learning how to do something we're not accustomed to doing in the States, which is walk into a store with no prices and haggle for the price. To my mind, it's one of life's great treasures to be able to effect. Onward to the next one. We're just going through a little imagery here of sites along the way, Valley of the Kings, which you'd already mentioned. Onwards to the different parts of the Nile, and I think it's also another aspect here which I would point out is we've done, I think, a thoughtful job of trying as much as possible to avoid the crowds. It will be a busy global time, a global focus and a moment in time for Egypt. So this doesn't look particularly busy here along the Nile, but we're going to do our utmost when it does get really busy to avoid choke points. So moving on, Jackie. Yep. And next one. This is what I was talking about in terms of our boat. It's the Menorca. It is one of those diabeers. You can see the sales I referenced. It is, to my mind, a nice balance between the traditional and the modern. Modern comforts, luxury in your cabins, and up top, kind of a feeling of how people would sail down in ancient times. The ability to lie out in large cushions and rugs and blankets and basically imbibe all day long as you choose and watch life go by and do little day excursions here and there. So on to the next one, gives us a little sense of the front of the vessel. And then next couple of slides, this is a top, as I mentioned, and the next couple of slides give us a sense of down below, hangout areas, as you can see, well-appointed rooms. So good space, good light. I like what we've chosen here. So that in a nutshell is a summation of the two trips. And I'm going to hand it over to Jackie now to talk a little bit through the rigidity of the science, what it is that we're going to be experiencing, and what sets this apart from an MMA trip perspective. Okay, Jackie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren. That is extraordinary. It truly is. So as Janelle said, I'm Jackie Milingo. I'm the new Director of Astronomy at the Mariah Mitchell Association, and I'm really excited to be a part of this. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the science of an eclipse. So my professor voice might come out here, but please make sure you ask any questions. If not now, then after we're done with this talk. But I thought I would just start by explaining what a solar eclipse is. There are two types of eclipses. There are solar eclipses and there are lunar eclipses. Often you'll see them happening in somewhat quick succession after each other. They're not always paired, but we'll see why they have a little bit of a relationship to each other. But primarily I'm going to talk about solar eclipses, and that happens when the moon passes directly between the Earth and the sun. It blocks the sun's light, literally just like putting your hand up in front of a really bright light. And then from the perspective of the Earth, that casts a shadow onto the Earth. And that deepest part of the shadow is the path of totality that then moves across a very thin ribbon on the surface of the Earth. The only reason a total solar eclipse is possible is because the moon and the sun happen to have approximately, not exactly, and it changes a little bit over the course of a month and the course of a year, the same angular size. So I'm distinguishing angular size from linear size here, meaning angular size is how big something appears to be, and it depends on how large it physically is, but also how far away it is. Something that's closer to you appears larger than if you took the same object and put it at a much larger distance, it would appear a little bit smaller. So that's what this picture up here, the top right is showing. Here's a woman standing on the surface of the Earth looking at the moon. Its angular size is how large it appears to be in the sky. And for the sun and the moon, that's only about half a degree. And when I say half a degree, a full circle is 360 degrees. But a better way to think about it is your arm. If you take your arm and you extend it, so don't bend your elbow, your hand is about 10 degrees wide when held at arm's length. And that's average, right? People with average length arms, average sized hands. A single finger is about 2 degrees wide, which means the sun and the moon both will fit. You can cover them entirely with a single finger. 4 of them will fit inside of a single finger. So that doesn't seem very angular and large, but that's what I mean. They're both about half a degree. And it's not because they're the same physical size. As you'll see in this picture here at the bottom, right? The moon is much smaller physically than the sun. The sun is 400 times larger in diameter than the moon is. But the sun also happens to be about 400 times farther away than the moon. So angularly, they're about the same size. It's not always exact. The moon's orbit around the Earth is not perfectly circular. The Earth's orbit around the sun is not perfectly circular. So their angular size changes a little bit over the course of a month and a year. So we get different types of eclipses, as you'll see down here. In this image at the bottom, here we are on the Earth. The shadow that the moon casts right at where that darkest part of the shadow, excuse me, hits the Earth, that's what we call the umbral part of the shadow, or the darkest part. That's where the path of totality would be, where that's hitting the Earth. But you could be a little bit off of that and see a partial eclipse. We call that the penumbral part of the shadow. So there are total eclipses if you're in right there at the umbra, and there are partial eclipses if you're off of that a little bit. There are also different types like annular eclipses if that distance is a little bit different, but that's basically what an eclipse is. Now, when do they happen? Because the moon has to be directly between the Earth and the sun, they can only happen in the new moon phase. So I have a picture here straight from the Astronomy 101 textbook. It's just like being back in college. We're looking from above the northern hemisphere, right at the North Pole here. Here's the Earth. The moon orbits around the Earth counterclockwise as viewed from this perspective. And then we've got the sun way off to the right in this picture. So as the moon orbits around the Earth and we see different parts of the illuminated half, that's why we see it go through phases. So here, when it's between the Earth and the sun, that's the new phase. Here, when it's on the other side of the Earth from the sun, we see the full illuminated half. That's the full phase. Just side note, this is when lunar eclipses occur, when then the moon passes through the Earth's shadow that's being cast into space by the sun. So every month we have a new moon, but we don't have a total solar eclipse every month. You might ask why that is. Professor Milingo here is about to tell you. So that's because there's a lot going on in this picture here at the bottom. So let me take my time a little bit. Here's the sun here at the center. This blue line is showing the Earth's orbit around the sun. We do this once every 365 and a quarter days. That defines an orbital plane, as we would say. I don't know if you've ever heard the term ecliptic plane, but we call this the ecliptic plane. But it's just simply the orbital plane that's defined by the Earth's orbit around the sun. Then you've got 4 different pictures, 4 different times of the year being shown here with the moon's orbit around the Earth. So here, here, and here. The orbital plane of the moon around the Earth, I'll show this one over here to the left, is tilted a little bit with respect to the Earth's orbital plane around the sun. That little 5-degree inclination means that those shadows aren't always going to align. So here in this scenario, and also the scenario over here to the right, when the moon is at new and also at full phase in these pictures, but the solar eclipses happen at new phase, they're aligned. They're all in the same plane, if you will. Does that make sense? Here, you'll see then as the Earth's orbiting around the sun, oops, excuse me, I gotta go back, I accidentally clicked. As the Earth is orbiting around the sun, that orbital plane of the moon doesn't change orientation. It's staying at that same inclination. So here you can see when we have a new moon, that shadow is above the Earth because it's above that ecliptic plane. And then here you can see that shadow is below the Earth. So this top picture is showing this scenario here from the side, where at the new moon, we still have that shadow being cast off into space, but it's not hitting the Earth, it's slightly below. So we don't have the ingredients, if you will, for a solar eclipse because the alignment just isn't there every single month. And most of the time that doesn't happen. It's only 2 to 3 times a year that we get everybody in the same plane, that you have an opportunity for a solar and a lunar eclipse. You hear more about lunar eclipses perhaps, and that's because the entire night side of the Earth has an opportunity to see a lunar eclipse, because as you can see in this picture here, the Earth's shadow much larger, reaches much further out because it's a larger body. The entire full moon fits inside of it, and then some. So if it's the night side of the Earth and the full moon is up, then everybody can see. And it's this scenario where they're in alignment. Everyone can see a lunar eclipse. Solar eclipses, on the other hand, are much more difficult to see because that little tiny piece of the shadow that hits the Earth is not that large. So not everyone on the Earth gets to see a total solar eclipse or even a partial solar eclipse. You can see here in this picture, this is the darkest part, or the umbral part of the shadow, as we talked about before. That is the path of totality. The patch that would see a partial eclipse is much larger here, but that little path of totality, it can vary between about 60 to 150 miles in diameter. Just the geometry of that depends on the specifics of the eclipse, but they're about 100 miles wide. And again, the partial eclipse path is much larger. So you have to be right in that tiny small swath that's being cut across the Earth to be able to see a total solar eclipse. And by the way, given the diameter of the Earth and the size of this at about 100 miles, that's less than 2% of the diameter of the Earth. So you really do have to make sure you're at the right place at the right time. Solar eclipses are quick. That time that it takes, because the moon's orbiting around the Earth, so it's trucking. And the time that it takes to just pass in front of the sun is just a few minutes. As Darren said, one of these eclipses is only about 2 minutes long. The other one about 6 minutes long. The longest it can possibly be is about 7.5 minutes. And again, the geometry just depends on the specifics of the eclipse. But they're very, very special events, very special events. So taking the time to actually put yourself in the path is really extraordinary. This is the eclipse from April 8th. I don't know if y'all remember that big one from 2024, as seen from space. This is one of the Earth Observatory satellites from NASA. So this is showing the much larger, right, penumbral partial part of the eclipse. And this would have moved in a path across the Earth. So they're special. If you can put yourself in the path of a total solar eclipse, it's an amazing, amazing experience. And just to emphasize how you really do have to make a point of putting yourself there, 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. So 2 to 3 eclipses every year. That means most of them are happening over the ocean, where you would literally have to put yourself on a boat. And I know many people who do that, that they make a point of putting themselves on a boat and going out in the middle of the ocean to be a part of that, because you have to be at the right place at the right time to be able to see it. And so you're very fortunate if you're able to see a total solar eclipse. So I just thought there are very special calculators that are put together by astronomers. We have the predictive power to, well, predict eclipses out into the future, precisely where those paths of totality are going to be, how long the eclipses are going to occur, what the characteristics are going to be like in the geometry. So this is the path of totality for the 2026 eclipse, and you can see it goes here through Iceland and then through Spain. And then this is the cutoff point where the sun sets, basically. And then, and you can, well, I think I have a close-up here in the next slide, yes, of where these different locations were that Darren was talking about.
Yeah,
So
I
this
think,
is the path of totality here.
yeah. So if you take the cursor and, yep, Logroño, if you head slightly west of that, that is where we would be based if the Spanish trip proceeds for that solar eclipse in 2026. I think that was the August the 12th one, the just shy of 2 minute eclipse. And I'm guessing because you're not exactly in the path of totality, which is a kind of variably mountainous slash remote regions, you give up
This whole swath is the path of totality.
Right. But that actual blue line, that center there, is going to be, if the totality, if the eclipse is, call it a minute and 50 seconds, Lagrange is a minute and 37 or a minute and
Yeah.
40. Yeah. So you do lose something a little bit. So I just want to
That's
point that out.
the greatest time duration.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's extraordinary. Just to be in this narrow swath is an extraordinary thing. Believe me, as an astronomer. And then I also mapped out where the path would be in 2027 here from sunrise. These look funny, but they're flat projections of a spherical Earth and then an arc that's going over a spherical Earth that's turning as the sun and moon are moving through the sky. So they look a little funny, but this blue line, right, that's the central part of the eclipse. Between the two red lines, that's the path of totality. And then these green lines are really defining where the partial eclipse is throughout that. And so in the next slide, I've zoomed in a little bit to show where and again, remind me, Darren, right down here is the location.
Exactly. Precisely. You're spot on. It's exactly.
Right there. Yep. That's the Red Sea. This is extraordinary, just an extraordinary opportunity to see this. In an extraordinary place, truly, even from an astronomy, right, perspective, in the history of astronomy perspective.
I mean, if you think about it, just if you go back to the prior slide, well, not that that really conveys the mysticism of a country, but if you think about it, you've got all of this ancient civilization and all of the exotic nature that comes with that alongside a solar eclipse. It's kind of the perfect storm, And I'm trying to upsell the trip. I'm just its wonderment, really. Anyway, sorry, on to your next slide.
No, I mean, astronomy is a very old practice. We refer to ourselves as the world's second oldest profession. And so we're the oldest being farming, of course. And so looking at the stars and of course, ancient Egyptians and the history of astronomy very much has root in this part of the world. All parts of the world really have their stories, and so it's really extraordinary. That would be an extraordinary place to see something like this, with modern equipment and a modern understanding, and not thinking that it was perhaps the rapture coming. So what do you see during totality? This is a collection of images that I grabbed from the American Astronomical Society has an eclipse site. And so these came from, I'm just going to remind myself, an eclipse that occurred in March of 2016. So this was from aboard a ship that was off the coast of Indonesia in the middle of the sea. So again, emphasizing the point that a lot of these are happening over water. And so if you can find yourself in the path of totality, people make a point of going there because they're that rare and that extraordinary. And the sequence runs from the upper right to the lower left. So you're seeing as the moon's disk is passing in front of the sun, and then this very last opportunity where it covers up the brightest part of the surface of the sun. And then at this point, this is the point of totality. So this is a series of images that have been put together. You can actually see the faintest part of the outer atmosphere of the sun, what we call the corona. And that is when you can actually take your eclipse glasses off and could actually look directly at it. Normally this outermost part of the atmosphere of the sun, which we call the corona, is very, very faint. So you would never see it if any part of this bright surface, which we call the photosphere, is visible. So this is the extraordinary opportunity that not a lot of people get to see this. We can see it using spacecraft all the time, but to see it with your own eyes from the surface of the Earth is extraordinary. Animals behave differently. Birds become silent. It's an unusual feature to happen when the normal diurnal motions, right, sort of come to a halt because of this. And then you can see as then the moon continues to move, because the moon is moving across the sky faster than we're seeing the sun move as a result of our rotation on our axis. So then it's going to move away from the disk and we start to see this photosphere again. So again, this part maximum for any eclipse given any geometry would be 7.5 minutes. So they are usually just a few minutes long, just depending on the geometry. So that's a long one that's going to be in Egypt. Just a little astronomy 101. I keep referring to these layers of the atmosphere of the sun. This is a cutaway view of the sun, a little cartoon picture. Here in the center, that's where energy generation takes place. That's where the nuclear fusion happens. If we go out, you can see this layer right here we call the photosphere, or the sphere of light. That's when you see pictures of the sun, just the surface of the sun, that's what you see. It's extremely bright. That's why you never want to look directly at the sun with your naked eye. You always want to be very careful with that. It's extraordinarily bright. That's where sunspots, which are a manifestation of magnetic activity, show up. But there are layers of atmosphere above that. It sounds strange talking about atmosphere with something that is literally a ball of gas. But the density of this gas gets lower and lower as you go out away from the core. It's most dense here, making fusion possible, and then gets less dense, which means the layers above the photosphere, the chromosphere, and this magnificent corona are extraordinarily low in density, much lower in density than the air in this room, much, much lower. And so they're very faint. They don't give off a lot of light, so you can't see them unless you cover up the photosphere. This next image is actually a collection of, the corona during an eclipse is very dynamic. And it's faint, but also has this broad range of brightness. These little red arcs you're seeing here are really coming from the chromosphere, which is that little layer right above the photosphere. So this is during totality. This was during an eclipse in August of 2017, as seen from Oregon. And so this is just a collection of images that were put together to show both features of the chromosphere and this very dynamic corona, which means crown. It's really extraordinary how low in density and faint, but how very active and dynamic this is. And I wanted to show you something because it doesn't really capture what you might see during a total solar eclipse, which is just a few minutes. But what I thought I would show you is this is an image. We don't ever get to see the corona. Let me start this movie. Unless you cover the photosphere of the sun. This is a movie. It was taken over the course of about 29 days, 27 days from a spacecraft that sits above the Earth's atmosphere and is dedicated to actually monitoring the sun. This little white circle you see here would be the extent of the photosphere I was talking about, the very bright part of the surface of the sun. So this is what's called a coronagraph. It's kind of like putting your hand in front of the bright part so you can see the faint corona, and you can see how active and dynamic this is. This is during a time of high solar activity, so it's belching out all of these particles, things that if they hit the Earth, they cause things like aurora, which we saw a little bit earlier. Oh, that looked like a planet just passing by. Yep, probably Mercury or Venus. And so you wouldn't see quite this much activity because it's just a few minutes, and this is showing activity over the course of almost a month, but it just gives you an idea of how dynamic the corona is and how extraordinary this star is, that is our parent star. So I'm gonna leave it there and open it up for any questions.
Thank you both so much. What a wonderful presentation. And I have a couple of questions while we wait. So everyone in the audience this evening, if you have any questions for Jackie or for Darren, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A and I will read them aloud and get your questions answered for you. But while we wait, as people, what is the word I like to use? Marinate on their questions. Both of you work at the intersection of wonder. Whether through travel or the cosmos, when planning an eclipse experience like this, or any kind of curated experience, especially, how do you design for that fleeting moment of totality in this instance, while also honoring the broader story of place, culture, and history? And I know you guys teased on that a lot. I'm just trying to get that all culminated in one answer.
I would say from our perspective, it's about trying to bring a sense of place to bear and trying to bring balance to bear and trying to set the scene as much as possible. And that is, when there are magnanimous things like this, I think we so often are focused on what the main sensory component of us as humans we use to consume that, like it's sight. But what other senses can we utilize, and what other senses can we use to enjoy the environment around us? So for me, it's kind of like setting the table. We've set the table in the lead in. We've learned about Egypt. We've learned about, antiquity. But yeah, I think it's just about trying to use as many sensory components as we can being there. That's how I would answer it from my perspective.
Thank you, Darren. Jackie, anything to add?
That is such a great question. I mean, as a scientist, I loved your answer, Darren. That was really great. As a scientist, there are things that, of course, and I'm an observational astronomer and I study magnetic activity in stars. So, of course, this is fascinating to me, thinking about the corona, thinking of this activity. And it's such a unique opportunity to get to study that part of the sun's atmosphere. But above and beyond all of that, I think for me, it's in that moment you can get a true paradigm shift, like to really shift yourself outside of our perspective, which is just like, these little creatures that are on the surface of the earth, and we're just trucking along, and the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And then you see the moon and its phases. And in these rare moments when they come together like this, to understand you're a part of this big dynamic series of bodies in this solar system that's been here for 4.6 billion years, in a universe that's 13.8 billion years. I think just stopping, forgetting about the science just for a moment and feeling, your humanness, if you will, on this scale, it's humbling, but it also, to me, makes me feel like, wow, I'm really, really a part of something. Like, look at me. I'm part of this. I'm part of something. And that's really, I don't know, that's extraordinary to me.
To follow up on that, travel often changes how we see the world, and astronomy changes how we see ourselves in the universe. So really piggybacking on what you just said, Jackie, what transformation do you both hope that travelers will walk away with after experiencing the 2026 and 2027 eclipse journeys, should they join?
I can start.
Yeah.
It was something that you said. I mean, just in thinking about how very old these cultures are, right? How very old that I jokingly, we as astronomers jokingly say it's the world's second oldest profession, but it truly has been around when you think of archaeoastronomical sites and some of these temples which have clear markings, that indicate people were thinking about seasonal changes and these patterns, right? Diurnal and seasonal changes as a result of seeing these celestial objects. And that connecting to the long millennia, as long as culture could communicate in the simplest ways about our observations of these things, that's extraordinary to me. And it's this combination of the cultural aspect and the what's left behind from people in the past, and then our modern understanding of astronomy and our place in the universe. That's really that's an amazing thing to put together.
Thank you, Jackie.
I would say that a trip like this is the personification of why you travel. In many ways, it's because we're taken out of our comfort zone and we can get different perspectives and different frame of references. And I always say to everybody, when I'm talking about the building blocks of the philosophy behind what we do is, I always think, like, what are we as human beings in essence? We're really just the sum of all of our experiences. The more experiences we have, the richer we are for it. That's what we can take with us, and that's what we can take through life. And I think this is a very interesting, rare opportunity and couple of experiences. So I hope that's what people will take away. It's like depending on your philosophy, I don't want to get too deep, but you kind of maybe get one go around. So you need to take the guts out of it. And this is an opportunity to take those guts out of it. It's going to make you a damn sight more interesting as a dinner companion than if you hadn't gone.
Agree with you both completely. I think, when you have these experiences, especially witnessing astronomical and celestial phenomena, it really gives you this perspective of how small we are in the grander scheme of this design, this really intricate design. And to your point, Darren, we really don't know what is next. We hope to wake up every morning, not to put a morbid spin on it, but it's really about being present and taking every opportunity that you can get to experience and contextualize our very existence, if that makes sense. It's how I feel about it.
Yeah. And I think it's in a way, to put a finer point on that, it's there's a component to it that is personal growth through travel. If you have something that you are independently interested in, this is the nexus of education and entertainment, like edutainment, if you like. It really is.
I like that. And in true Mariah Mitchell spirit and fashion, inspiring lifelong learning, because learning doesn't just stop once we leave a formal educational space. So immersive education definitely, I think, is one of the most valuable experiences that we can all gift
Yeah.
ourselves.
No, I love it. It's interactive and it's fun.
And to piggyback on that, eclipses have always rather inspired awe, fear, and ritual across different civilizations for thousands of years. How, in your respective fields, astronomy and curated travel, how would you reinterpret that ancient emotional response for modern travelers? And thinking of it in the light of the first people to ever see an eclipse and not even understanding what that was. So it has meant something very different. And Jackie, you touched on this a little bit for different cultures over, our existence essentially. So how do you hope or maybe intend to recreate or reinterpret some of those really unique experiences? Not that we can match them exactly.
Jackie, would you like to kick
You want
off?
me to go?
What I
Yeah.
thought about, Jackie, about that question was when you mentioned how birds experience eclipses and just diurnal creatures, how everything just changes for them. So that really is what inspired that question.
That I have to say, in going through college and graduate school and, with a challenging major that took a lot of study time, I never gave myself an opportunity
Mhm.
to think about the history of astronomy, the history of this study, which is so incredibly, I mean, it's as old as someone just going outside at night without any light pollution and looking up and thinking, what's that? Um, and the more I give myself an opportunity to stop and think about that, the more fascinating it is to consider people at a time when they had no idea what this fireball in the sky even was. I mean, we know exactly what it is now. We know exactly how it got there. We know exactly how long it's been there. We know exactly how much time it has left. We know how these planets got here. We know how the moon got here. We have a good idea. We're looking at it. Um, they had no idea. And to stop and take that out and to think about how, I mean, you talk about awe inspiring and striking that must have been, and frightening that must have been, to not know why something like an eclipse was occurring. And comets have these histories of being portents of and bad omens, and the stories that would have been told, and the just the mythology around these things. I would really want to embrace that and think more about that and introduce that alongside our very modern understanding of exactly the physics of what's going on here and how extraordinary it is, even in the light of thousands of other stellar systems that are here. But man, connecting it to what that must have felt like to someone who had no idea what these things were, or that we had this moon orbiting around us and we orbited around the sun, because that really wasn't, that was only a few hundred years ago that we really embraced that. That would be something I would want to really just dig into.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I don't have that much to add to that, other than to say that if it were me, out of personal interest, I say Jackie nailed it. What were people thinking when suddenly they were going about their business and life turned dark? They just so happened to be in the path of totality, and it went dark during the middle of the day when it wasn't supposed to. What
Mhm.
happened at that time in history? Did it give rise to something? Was there a momentous event? Was there a huge quantum leap forward, backwards? How do you retrace history at moments of significant solar eclipses or even lunar eclipses for that matter? So yeah, I
Mhm.
think it's kind of, yeah, that would be what I would delve into a little bit more deeply if I
Yeah.
had the
Fun,
time.
fun fact, there is a book by Isaac Asimov. It was written many decades ago called Nightfall, about a civilization that lives on a planet that has multiple suns and a few moons, and once every like 10,000 years, um, like one of this, all the suns are set except one, and that one gets eclipsed by one of the many moons. And so they train themselves to understand what nightfall is and what it looks like. And because, just as you said, they must have been. That's probably an extraordinary thing to try to brace yourself for if you've
Mhm.
never seen nightfall. And it gets a little cooler, right? In those few minutes when you don't have the sun beating down, you're like in that shadow on Earth, like finding a little shade in a nice hot summer. That'll be nice.
It'll definitely balance it out in totality.
Comes right back once the shadow goes away, but still, I
We
take
hope.
advantage of it.
We hope, right? To your point, Darren, yeah, we hope.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that these curated experiences really, especially in thinking of the Egypt trip in particular, rather, that having an Egyptologist present to really contextualize history, time, and place really can evoke a lot of that deeply rooted lore even, and there's an opportunity to embed a lot of these historic experiences or prehistoric experiences to give people who haven't had the opportunity to really embrace or open their minds to that avenue. So I think that this is a wonderful intersection of exploration and travel, as well as curiosity and science and education. So I really, really am so excited to see just where this all takes us.
Yeah, no, that's a great summation. 100% agree with you. 100%.
And just in closing, I guess I would ask, what questions have we not asked as the audience that we should have asked both of you, if any? Anything that you'd like to share with us that is essential for us to know?
Um, I'll say from my perspective, there you're in a you're in a country for a particular reason, and you're there for a finite period of time. But if your interests extend beyond that particular event, the science behind it, and if your interests are more broad within the country or regional, know that that's something that we can very easily facilitate. So if you turn to me and say, hey, I desperately want to get into the desert, or I desperately want to see the greatest library on earth. I want to get up to the Nile Delta and see the
Mm.
Port of Alexandria. Or, hey, I know that Jordan is right there, or I'd like to go diving in the Red Sea. Pick your poison, whatever it is. Um, that's worthwhile. And I'm not trying to upsell the trip commercially. I'm just pointing out that there are riches on your doorstep, and some guys say 9-10 days is kind of a snapshot. How else can I flesh this out? how can I leave that region saying to myself, okay, I don't have any unfinished business. And I think that those opportunities exist. And I would strongly advocate for anybody who's looking at this as a core trip to say, okay, what are my interests beyond this? Am I able to execute on that? The answer is yes, we can with enough advance notice, but consider that for sure. Because this is a snapshot.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Darren.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have much to add to that. These are such wonderfully complete and carefully designed trips that, I mean, there are so many pieces and parts of it. The science is a part of it for this extraordinary event, but there's so much that surrounds it. Yeah, just living in all of it and embracing all of it. That's an extraordinary opportunity. Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to our conclusion this evening. I would like to thank you both again for presenting this evening on this wonderful collaborative experience and curated experience that is available to everyone. And how do we get in touch with you? Who should we lean toward? Should we lean toward MMA for contact? Darren, should we be directing people toward you? How would you like to handle
Certainly,
inquiries?
yeah. I mean, certainly the latter. We have obviously travelsommelier.com is a very easy way to get hold of us. You can get hold of us through info@travelsommelier.com. But for sure, we have one dedicated person here who is the MMA go-to. Her name is Hayley Landers, so Hailey, Hayley at travelsommelier.com. And she is all things MMA, very knowledgeable about the nuts and bolts of the itineraries, has been instrumental in designing them, and is a wealth of knowledge. So that would be the gateway. Very easy one stop. And yes, we're happy to facilitate everything for certainly the Egypt trip and anything else further afield.
And thank you both for joining us for our Science Speaker Series for November at the Mariah Mitchell Association. Huge thank you to you both for your time and your attention to detail this evening and beyond. So on behalf of the MMA, thank you both.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Janelle.
Janelle.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Darren. You have the coolest job in the world.
It's not the secret is it's not a job.